Okay, our topic today, as we continue discussion of the early medieval period working up to Thomas Aquinas, the problem of universals. And I want to start with the formulation that Boethius gave to this problem there in the 10th century. And so, let's see. No, I guess I need to come closer, don't I? There we go. Now all we need to do is to focus it. Got it. Boethius' formulation of the problem of universals. He posed it in 3 questions, to which, in the immediately ensuing discussion, a 4th question was added. First, do genera and species really exist in nature, that is to say, outside of the mind, or are they merely mental constructs? In other words, are there real forms? And of course, the positive response to that question yields a realist conclusion. So we speak of a realistic theory of universals, to the effect that there are real universals independently of simply universal concepts, or universal application of terms. Okay, realism. The second question, if they are realities, are they material or immaterial? That is to say, are they transcendent in some Platonic sense? Or are these universals materialized in particulars? And there you have basically the distinction between the Aristotelian and Platonic traditions. 2 different kinds of realism, transcendent or immanent forms. The third question, therefore, do they exist apart from particulars or within them? And the 4th question that gets added, are universal concepts thought separately from particulars? That is to say, can we think of universals in abstraction from any reference to particular examples? So that normally if I say brown, you tend to picture a certain kind of brown, or do you? If I say square, do you picture a certain drawing, or not? Now, to think them separately from particulars is without reference to any particular example, or mental image of that sort. To think abstractly, to employ would come to be known as abstract general ideas. We talk of general ideas referring to a particular, but abstract general ideas without reference to particulars. And that view that there are universal concepts which we think separately from particulars produces the conceptualist as distinct from the nominalist theory. Okay? Well, you can see how those questions could well have elicited quite a lot of discussion, which they did, and as a result, the problem of universals, as it developed, as the discussion developed, generated these initial 4 views. Aquinas subsequently takes it further. I've already mentioned that Bonaventure took it a little bit further, and then we'll have to refer to Duns Scotus, who takes it further still, before finally William of Ockham repudiates the whole thing. Okay? So, some words initially then about the first position, often labelled extreme or exaggerated realism, a view that is ascribed to John Scotus Erigena, sometimes ascribed to Anselm, though he may be somewhat ambiguous in that regard. Now, exaggerated realism is the view that the forms of species and genera is the plural of genus, of course, that forms of species and genera exist in reality separately from particulars, while each particular participates in that one and the same form. But forms not only exist in that transcendent fashion, somehow or other they exist in particulars as well, so that there is an identity between particulars by virtue of participating in that one and the same form, numerically 1, recurring in every particular case. This kind of strong realism. And the thing that differentiates individuals is simply whatever degree of privation there is, privation of participation fully in the form. So in varying degrees, each of us as individuals is less fully human than the ideal human would be. And our individuality consists in that appropriate degree of, what do you want to call it, lessness, privation is the word that's used. And how do we know these forms? By dialectic and the illumination of the mind by the divine waters. So that's a sort of Platonic view, very much so. And it was, for a while at least, given theological application, which made it particularly attractive. If 3 particulars can participate in the essence of one form, then you can talk of 3 personal subsistences within the essence of one Godhead. So it became the metaphysical scheme by virtue of which to articulate the doctrine of the Trinity. Similarly with the idea of a church universal, in which particular individuals all participate in the same way. Similarly with regards to original sin as the universal, which is evidenced in all of our particular cases. Or transubstantiation, where it is the particular accidents that we taste that remain the same, though the essence is changed. The underlying reality is changed from the essence of bread to the essence of body, from the essence of wine to the essence of the blood. And so the real presence in that transubstantiation sense of Christ in the Eucharist. So exaggerated realism then was given all sorts of theological application, and understandably then people initially were very defensive of that kind of realism, because they saw it as theologically essential. One of the principal advocates of exaggerated realism was a man named William of Champeaux. Translate the French and it comes out as Bill Field. Does it not? Later on you'll come to Robert Grosseteste, that comes out as Bobby Fathead. But, okay. Sure, that's the literal translation, isn't it? 17th, 16th century French didn't have the circumflex, it had an S instead of the circumflex, so Grosseteste is Grossetat, fathead, big head. Okay. Talking of William of Champeaux, Bill Field, he seems to have advocated this position, but came under a great deal of criticism from Roscelin and Abelard. You can read about that in Stumpf. And so he retreated to an alternative position that is usually referred to as indifferentism, in which he admitted that forms exist in reality, yes, but only in the reality of the particulars, not in a transcendent sense, only in the reality of the particulars. And each particular then participates in that form. All members of a species, indifferently, participate in that one and the same form. So that in essentials, indifferent with regards to individual differences, in essentials we share the same form. In accidents, to use the Aristotelian terminology, in accidents rather than essence, that is to say in our individual differences, yes, we're different, but in essence, indifferent. And these forms, then, are known by virtue of the fact that all members of the species share these essential properties, which it's possible to recognize and to think of in abstraction from those recurrent similarities in every member of a class. So the retreat, then, was to an immanentistic realism. The forms are immanent rather than transcendent, and the forms known by abstraction rather than by dialectic. It sounds as if he's moving closer to an Aristotelian, a kind of position. Now, even that alternative was unacceptable to Roscelin, who was arguing for a nominalist position. According to the nominalist, there are no real forms. No real forms of a transcendent sort, and no real forms of an immanent sort. No real forms. Nothing of them exists outside of the mind. Now, within the mind, moreover, we do not think in terms of universals. There are no abstract general ideas, no universal concepts. Oh, there are words that seem to have general reference, general terms, common nouns. The word human, the word brown, the word square, the word justice. Sure, these are general terms, but the terms are only universal in the sense that they refer to every member of a certain class. The term is a particular term. The sound is a particular sound. It's written in a particular way. The word is a particular. But it is used universally for a whole class without reference to particulars. Take it back. It is used for the whole class without reference to anything but particulars. Okay? It's used with reference to all of the particulars in the class indiscriminately. Indiscriminately. And so the term nominalism indicates that the only thing universal is the way the name, nominalism, the way the name is used in referring universally to a whole class. So for the nominalist, the only thing that's universal is the universal reference of a particular word, a particular term. There are no real universals, and we don't think universal concepts. Now, can you see the implications of that? Well, theologically. And Roscelin was accused of tritheism. Three gods. Similar, but not one. Three similar particulars. Tritheism. And he was accused of denying that there is any church universal, or any original sin, simply because those doctrines had been defended in terms of a theory of real universals. But quite apart from the theological questions, which incidentally led to the condemnation of nominalism at the Council of Soissons in 1093, the Council of Soissons. In addition to those theological problems, you have the further philosophical consequence, that if there are no real universals, there is no natural moral law inherent in the essence of human nature. There is no natural moral law. And as you realize, the theory of moral law, natural moral law, had been developed in Augustine and becomes very significant in Thomas Aquinas. But even at this stage, in the 10th and 11th century, it had become a major part of the medieval philosophical tradition.
Sorry, was that something Roscelin said or something other people
interpret? No, Roscelin was able to draw that conclusion. Because natural moral law gives you universal moral obligations by virtue of the universality of human nature. How is the moral law within us? By virtue of a form, which gives us this essential nature and essential intentions. Purpose. So, nominalism. While it was condemned back there in the 11th century, when we get to William of Ockham in the 14th, 15th century, we find that he revived nominalism. He's usually spoken of as a major nominalist. And it is William of Ockham's nominalism that was assimilated by Martin Luther and had a tremendous impact in 16th and 17th century philosophy. Okay? So watch for this to reoccur. In effect, what nominalism is saying is that the classic kind of metaphysical explanation for the orderliness of nature and for cosmic justice, the classic explanation that goes back to Anaxagoras' nous, Heraclitus' logos, and the developing theory of forms, that is false. So it would, in effect, destroy the whole metaphysical substructure for Greek and medieval thought. It would be radically revolutionary. So understandable that it was rejected in that way. Now, a compromise position began to emerge, represented by the conceptualism of Abelard. The conceptualism of Abelard, who was prepared to agree with Roscelin that no forms exist in reality, transcendent or immanent. But he disagreed with Roscelin about whether we think universal concepts. Abelard insisted that universal concepts exist, occur within our minds, and that we do think them separately from particulars. We develop abstract general ideas. Now, admittedly, abstract general ideas are not always very clear. They may be very general. But we are able to conceive them abstractly. And that made possible the conceptualizing of universal principles, the conceptualizing of species, etc., though without corresponding reference to real forms of an extra-mental sort. Now, those are the four main views. You get the general picture. Admittedly, it's a little bit confusing at first, but let's distinguish the question of whether there are universal concepts from the question of whether there are real universals. Okay? And you can begin to see how these positions line up. Extreme realism wants to say yes to both. Extreme realism wants to say yes to both. And to affirm that there is a one-to-one correspondence between our concepts and real universals. Inasmuch as dialectic gets at them with illumination, we're able to have the sort of knowledge that Plato envisioned. On the other hand, indifferentism will say, yes, there are real universal concepts and real universals. We do think universal concepts, and there are real universals, though not as clear about the relationship. It's much more approximate to the relationship between our concepts and things. It's not as final. Third, the nominalist wants to say no to both, and the conceptualist wants to say yes to the concepts and no to the real universals. Okay?
How would Rosalind has defended sort of exactly what came out in conceptualism, that there are such that we do talk in classes of things, and there is this word that speaks of
yeah.
I mean, how do you justify that psychological process that we do it? In fact, there is a
Well, I think he would say we simply learn to use the same sign for every kind of cat. So what's magic about that?
how would you say that you can conceive of a cat, you know?
If you think of cat in general, you either have simply an image of a roughly cat-shaped thing, undefined with regards to particulars, not big or small, etc., etc. Or perhaps you don't picture something at all, but the cat simply is a sound that rings in your mind that you can pick up on in referring to. Yeah, though ask yourself, when we think abstractly, what do we think? You see, in the final analysis, I think you have to say that abstract thought, independently of visualizing particulars, abstract thought uses symbols, either verbal symbols or some other kinds of what Harold Peston, the conservatory, calls language. You see, musical symbols, whatever. Yeah. You think using symbols. Now, but the symbol, then, is a way of thinking about an abstraction. When you think America, what do you think? You say, Stars and Stripes? National anthem, a football game? Picture of a map? What do you think? Or do you think of, what sort of ideals? What do you think? You see? And I think it's obvious that you can think of America in terms of, say, picture of a map, as I suspect somebody growing up in another culture might. I confess as a kid growing up in Britain,